Marcus stood tall in the grand throne room, surrounded by alien technology that hummed and pulsed with energy. He had seen many strange worlds in his time, but this one, this place, felt different. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and the walls were adorned with glowing symbols that he couldn't begin to understand. At the end of the room, perched upon an ornate throne, was the alien princess. Her presence was commanding, her eyes sharp as she looked him over. Her people had invited him here to discuss terms of peace, but before anything could begin, the princess couldn't resist the urge to test the human. "So, this is what you call gear?" she asked, her voice dripping with amusement. She glanced at Marcus's simple, worn armor, nothing like the advanced technology her people were accustomed to. "It looks like a child's toy compared to what my people use. I can't believe this is all you have to defend yourselves." The room filled with laughter, the princess's voice cutting through the stillness. Marcus didn't flinch. He had grown used to the mockery. Humans weren't known for their flashy gear or overwhelming strength, but they were clever, adaptable, and determined. "Well, you might be surprised," Marcus replied calmly, his eyes meeting hers with a challenge. He didn't mind the laughter. It only fueled him more. He knew what his gear could do, even if she didn't. The princess raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Prove it, then. If your gear is so impressive, let's see it in action. Show me what it can really do, human." She sat back, clearly amused by the challenge she had set. The court fell silent, awaiting the spectacle. Marcus took a deep breath. This was the moment he had prepared for. His armor wasn't much to look at, just a set of dark, flexible plates designed for mobility, with a few hidden gadgets here and there. But it was more than it seemed. The suit had been made to be discreet, to blend in, but it was packed with technology from Earth's most brilliant minds. He didn't hesitate. Slowly, he moved his arm, tapping a small button on his wrist. Immediately, a thin force field activated around him, shimmering faintly but strong enough to block any attack. The court gasped, but the princess's smile never faded. "Impressive," she said with a mocking grin, "but I still don't see anything that could be of use in a real fight." Marcus smiled. "That's just the beginning," he said. The princess's eyes narrowed. She had underestimated him, and she could see that now. She wasn't ready for what was coming next. The princess stared at Marcus, still sitting on her throne with her arms crossed. She wasn't impressed by his shield. It looked too weak to her, too fragile. She had expected something more advanced, something that could show off the power of a human. But all she saw was a simple man, in simple armor, standing before her. "So, is this all you have, human?" she asked again, this time with a hint of boredom in her voice. "A weak little force field. I've seen better in our training grounds." Marcus didn't flinch. He knew she was testing him, but he wasn't about to give up so easily. He had more up his sleeve than she could ever imagine. The human mind was the greatest weapon, and it had given birth to innovations that no one had thought possible. And this was just the beginning. "I've got more tricks," he said with a confident smile. He was calm, his eyes locked with hers. The princess might have laughed at his gear, but that wouldn't last long. The court fell silent as Marcus began to move. He reached behind his back and pressed a hidden button on the armor's chest plate. Immediately, a thin layer of metallic plating shifted and opened, revealing a compact device tucked inside. The device glowed briefly before it expanded into a full-length energy blade, pulsing with bright, dangerous light. The room gasped as Marcus held the weapon with ease. The princess's eyes widened slightly, her earlier amusement fading. The energy blade was unlike anything she had seen before. It wasn't flashy, and yet its power was undeniable. The princess could feel the energy in the air, crackling as if the blade itself was alive. "Now this is more like it," Marcus said, his voice steady, but with a trace of pride. "I didn't think you'd be impressed with the force field, so I've got this." The princess stared at the energy blade in his hands, her mind racing. She had expected him to fail, to fall into her trap, But now there was a spark of uncertainty. Was this really all there was to humans? Their gear seemed so simple, but when used the right way, it could be just as powerful as anything the princess's people had. "I see," she said slowly, still recovering from the shock. She was impressed, but she wouldn't show it. "That's more like it, human. But let's see if you can handle a real test." Marcus wasn't done yet. He wasn't about to show all of his cards at once. He had one final trick to play, and this would be the one that would prove once and for all that the princess had underestimated humanity. He took a step forward, his eyes locked on hers. "You wanted to see what it could do. Watch closely." The princess's eyes narrowed, unsure of what was coming next. But Marcus was confident. His gear was simple, yes, but it was far from weak. And with the right strategy, he could turn the tide in a heartbeat. The room grew quiet as Marcus stood before the princess, his energy blade still glowing brightly in his hands. The princess had been amused at first, but now she could see there was more to the human than she had expected. Her confidence had been shaken, but she wasn't about to back down. "I've seen your little tricks," she said with a smirk, "but let's see how well you do in a real challenge." She stood up from her throne, her voice firm. "Let's see if you can survive against my warriors." The court gasped. The princess was known for her harsh tests, and this was no small challenge. Her elite warriors were among the fiercest in the galaxy, trained in combat from a young age, armed with the most advanced technology. But Marcus wasn't intimidated. He had faced much worse on Earth. His mind raced as he sized up the warriors who stepped forward. There were 5 of them, all heavily armed and wearing thick, protective armor. Marcus knew that his gear wasn't invincible, but it was adaptable. His plan was simple: use his wits and his training to turn the tables. The princess raised her hand, and the battle began. The warriors rushed at Marcus with incredible speed, their weapons raised and ready. Marcus stood his ground, waiting for the right moment. As the first warrior lunged toward him, he stepped aside, using his enhanced speed to avoid the attack. With a quick swipe of his energy blade, he deflected the warrior's strike and pushed him back. The princess's eyes narrowed as she watched him move with precision, his every action calculated. She had expected him to be clumsy, to rely on brute force. But Marcus was doing something she hadn't expected. He was outsmarting her warriors at every turn. One of the warriors swung a heavy hammer toward him, but Marcus ducked and activated his suit's hidden thrusters. With a burst of speed, he flew past the warrior, landing behind him. Before the warrior could turn around, Marcus struck, using the flat of his energy blade to knock the hammer from his hands. The princess's smirk began to fade. She had never seen anything like this before. The human wasn't just fighting. He was using his surroundings, his gear, and his quick thinking to stay one step ahead. The warriors were fast, but Marcus was faster. He was playing the game on his terms, and so far, it was working. 2 more warriors closed in on him, but Marcus didn't panic. Instead, he activated his wrist-mounted EMP device. The air hummed for a moment, and the warriors froze as their weapons short-circuited. They looked at each other in confusion, giving Marcus the perfect opening. In a blur of motion, he disarmed both of them, leaving them defenseless. The last warrior, the leader, hesitated. He watched as his comrades were defeated with ease, and his gaze shifted to the princess, who was now watching the fight with wide eyes. Marcus grinned. "Is that all you've got?" he asked, his voice steady. He was ready for whatever came next. The princess didn't speak. She was speechless. Her plan had backfired. She had thought the human would fall quickly, but instead, he was showing her just how dangerous his simplicity could be. The room fell silent as Marcus stood victorious, his energy blade still humming in the quiet aftermath of the battle. The 5 warriors who had attacked him now lay on the ground, disarmed and defeated. His breathing was steady, his heart pounding with adrenaline, but his expression remained calm. He had expected this. He knew exactly what he was doing. The princess, however, looked stunned. Her eyes flickered from Marcus to her fallen warriors and back again. This was not how she had imagined the test going. The human had outsmarted her most skilled fighters without breaking a sweat. A feeling of doubt crept into her mind. Had she underestimated him too much? What is this? The princess muttered under her breath, barely audible. Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he lowered his energy blade and stood tall, facing her. His gear, simple and unassuming as it was, had proven its worth. The princess had assumed that her warrior's strength and technology would easily overpower the human. But now she was forced to confront the fact that human ingenuity and strategy were far more dangerous than she had anticipated. "I told you," Marcus said, his voice calm but with a hint of pride. "Humanity's strength isn't in our numbers or our weapons. It's in our ability to adapt and overcome. We might not have the advanced tech that your people do, but we know how to use what we have in ways you might not expect." The princess stared at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. She wanted to deny it, to argue, but the evidence was right in front of her. The human had shown that he could use his gear in ways that her people's weapons couldn't match. His ingenuity had turned the tide in his favor, and she was beginning to realize that this wasn't just a lucky break. Her mind raced. Could it be possible? Could humans really be as dangerous as Marcus was making them out to be? She had always thought of them as a lesser species, easily controlled, easily defeated. But now, after seeing Marcus in action, she couldn't deny the truth. She was facing something she had never expected. A human who had the skill and knowledge to take on her best warriors and win. "How is this possible?" she asked, her voice no longer mocking but filled with genuine curiosity. "Your gear, it's not like anything I've seen before. It doesn't make sense." Marcus smiled slightly. "You'd be surprised what we can do with limited resources," he replied. "We may not have the power of your technology, but we know how to make the most of what we have. It's not just about the gear. It's about how you use it." The princess's confidence wavered. Her earlier arrogance had faded, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. She had been the one in control, the one who laughed and mocked. Now it was clear that the human had turned the tables on her. And he had done it with something as simple as his mind and a few well-placed gadgets. For the first time, she wasn't sure how to respond. The princess looked at the fallen warriors, then back at Marcus, who stood unshaken. She had seen what he was capable of, and it made her question everything she had believed about humans. The room was still, and the princess remained frozen in place, her eyes locked on Marcus. The defeat of her warriors had left her speechless. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had thought humans were simple creatures, easy to predict and control. But Marcus had proven her wrong in every way possible. Marcus stood tall, his energy blade now deactivated and tucked away in its compartment. He had played his part, and now it was time for him to reveal the final piece of his plan. He knew the princess wouldn't truly understand the power of his gear until she saw it for herself, until she realized that there was much more beneath the surface. He took a deep breath and slowly began to remove his outer armor. The princess watched him closely, her curiosity growing. What more could there possibly be? She had already seen his energy blade and his impressive tactics. Was there something else hidden beneath that would surprise her even more? One by one, Marcus unlatched the clasps of his armor, revealing the layers beneath. The princess's gaze shifted from his hands to his face, unable to tear her eyes away. As each piece of armor came off, she could see the sleek lines of advanced technology beneath, hidden beneath the simple exterior that had initially made her laugh. When Marcus finally removed the last piece, his full gear was exposed. The suit beneath was sleek and functional, designed for maximum mobility and flexibility. The technology embedded within was far more advanced than anything she had imagined. A series of small but powerful devices were integrated into the fabric, each one serving a different purpose, all working together to make him a force to be reckoned with. But it wasn't just the technology that caught the princess off guard. It was the simplicity of it. There were no giant weapons or flashy gadgets. Everything had been carefully designed to be discreet, to blend in. The true power of Marcus's gear was that it didn't look like anything special until it was used. "You see," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm, "it's not about appearances. It's about how you use what you have." The princess stood in stunned silence, her mouth slightly open as she took in the sight of the human's gear. For the first time, she saw the true strength of humanity, not in the power of their weapons, but in their creativity, their ability to make the most of what they had. She had thought that strength came only from size and technology, but Marcus had shown her a different truth. I didn't realize," the princess murmured, her voice quieter than before. "Your technology, it's not like ours. It's so compact." Marcus smiled slightly, sensing the shift in her attitude. "That's the human way. We don't always have the best or the biggest, but we know how to use what we have. We make things work, even when the odds are against us." The princess's mind was racing. She had underestimated him, but now she couldn't help but feel a sense of respect. The human's gear wasn't just simple, it was intelligent. It wasn't about raw power, it was about efficiency, adaptability, and most importantly, the ability to surprise. As Marcus stood before her, revealing the full extent of his abilities, the princess realized she had a lot to learn. And perhaps in the end, humanity was not the weak, primitive species she had once thought them to be. The princess stood in silence, her mind trying to process everything that had just happened. She had always believed that her people were the most advanced, that they were the superior race in the galaxy. But now, standing before her, was a human, someone she had once dismissed as weak and insignificant, who had shown her something she never expected. Marcus had proven himself to be far more capable than she could have imagined. His gear wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of humanity's true strength, resourcefulness, innovation, and adaptability. And as much as she hated to admit it, she had been wrong. The princess had underestimated him, and now she found herself questioning everything she had believed about humans. "Your technology." The princess's voice faltered. She had intended to mock him again, to show that her people were still in control, but the words caught in her throat. It was clear now that there was no mocking left. "It's not like ours. It's more subtle." Marcus nodded, his expression serious. Sometimes the best technology isn't the biggest or the flashiest. It's the one that works when you need it the most. And we've learned how to make things work, even when we don't have the resources other species do. The princess's gaze softened, but she still wasn't ready to fully accept what she had just witnessed. "How did you learn all of this? I don't understand. Your people are so primitive compared to mine. How did you create such advanced technology?" Marcus shrugged, his voice steady. "It wasn't easy, but we never gave up. We fought, we struggled, but we always found a way. That's how humans survive, by refusing to quit, no matter what." There was a long pause as the princess absorbed his words. She could feel the weight of what he was saying, and for the first time, she realized that there was more to humanity than she had ever imagined. They weren't just a primitive species, they were a force to be reckoned with. They had learned how to fight, how to adapt, and most importantly, how to use their minds to survive. "Perhaps," the princess began slowly, the doubt in her voice giving way to something else, something like respect. "Perhaps I have been wrong about humans. You've shown me that there's more to your people than meets the eye." Marcus gave her a small smile. "It's not about being right or wrong. It's about learning from each other. Humans aren't perfect, but we do what we can. And sometimes that's enough." The princess nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. She looked at Marcus, no longer with mockery or disdain, but with a new understanding. In that moment, she realized that she had underestimated humanity's potential, and she knew she had to change her perspective. "Maybe we can learn from each other," she said softly. "Maybe we can help each other." Marcus's eyes softened. I think that's a good idea. For the first time, the princess didn't see Marcus as just a human. She saw him as someone who had something to offer, someone who could teach her, and perhaps help her people in ways she had never considered before. The divide between their two species had always seemed vast, but now it seemed a little smaller, a little more manageable. The princess stood there, her posture no longer rigid and commanding. She was deep in thought, her gaze shifting between Marcus and the still silent room. The tension had lifted, but there was something new in the air, an understanding that hadn't been there before. She had come into this meeting expecting to prove her people's superiority, but now all she felt was the weight of her own misjudgments. "I misjudged you," she said finally, her voice steady but soft. She had meant to be proud and defiant, but instead there was a humility in her words. "I thought your people were nothing more than a passing curiosity. Primitive, weak, but you've shown me something entirely different." Marcus didn't respond right away. He simply nodded, understanding that the princess had to come to this realization on her own. He didn't expect her to admit she was wrong. It wasn't easy for someone of her rank to do so, especially in front of her court. But he knew that humanity's greatest strength was their ability to adapt, to prove people wrong when they underestimated them. "You're not the first to think that way," Marcus said, his voice calm. "A lot of people look at us and assume we're not a threat, but they don't see what we can do when it matters. When it's our survival on the line, we'll do anything to get through it." The princess's expression softened as she considered his words. "I see now that it's not your technology that makes you dangerous, it's your will. Your refusal to back down." Marcus smiled slightly. "That's the human way. We don't have the luxury of giving up, and we're not afraid to face challenges head-on." The princess stood silently for a moment longer, absorbing the weight of his words. The court around her remained still, watching the exchange, but no one dared to speak. The change in the room was palpable. Gone was the mockery, replaced by something more respectful, more genuine. The princess had once seen Marcus as nothing more than a human in poorly made gear, but now she saw him as an equal, as someone worthy of admiration. "You've earned my respect," she said, her voice quieter but sincere. "I thought I could dismiss you, make you an example of human weakness, but instead you've shown me the strength that comes from being underestimated." Marcus didn't flinch at her words. He had known all along that this was possible, that the princess would come to understand. Respect wasn't something that could be demanded. It had to be earned. And Marcus had done that through his actions, through his calm demeanor, and through the quiet strength that came from human ingenuity. "I've never met anyone like you," the princess continued, her voice thoughtful. "Perhaps I've been wrong about more than just your technology. Maybe my people need to learn from you, not just defeat you." Marcus gave her a small nod. "The galaxy is a big place. We're all more alike than we think, if we just take the time to understand one another." For the first time, the princess felt a genuine sense of curiosity toward the human standing before her. She had always been taught to see humans as weak and insignificant. But now, in this quiet moment of mutual respect, she saw something else, something worth exploring. "I think we can learn from each other," the princess said, a spark of hope in her voice. "Maybe it's time we stopped thinking of you as just humans. Maybe it's time we thought of you as allies." Marcus smiled, his expression warmer now. "I'd like that." The atmosphere in the throne room had shifted. Gone were the mocking smirks, the laughter, and the uncertainty. In their place was something deeper, an understanding, a mutual respect that had grown between the alien princess and the human soldier. The once rigid boundaries between their worlds were beginning to blur, as if a new path was being carved before them. The princess, still standing before Marcus, now wore a thoughtful expression. Her mind raced as she considered everything she had witnessed. The human had demonstrated more than just the power of his gear. He had shown the strength of his spirit, the resilience of his people. And for the first time, she wasn't just looking at him as a human. She was seeing him as a fellow being capable of greatness. I've been too focused on our differences, the princess admitted, her voice more measured now. I believe that our technology, our strength, made us the superior species. But now I see the value in something I never considered. Your drive, your determination to never give up. It's something we could learn from. Marcus nodded, a small but genuine smile forming on his face. That's the human way. We don't have the most advanced weapons or the grandest fleets, but we know how to fight, how to adapt to any situation. The princess looked around at the fallen warriors, now quietly rising and regrouping. Despite their defeat, there was no bitterness in their eyes. They too had learned something today, something they hadn't expected to witness in a human. The princess could sense a shift in them as well. This, she began slowly, turning her gaze back to Marcus. This was not just a victory. It was a lesson. Perhaps humanity is not as insignificant as I once believed. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He had never wanted to be seen as the one who had to prove humanity's worth. But in that moment, he realized that the respect they had earned wasn't just for his strength. It was for the perseverance of his people, their ability to survive against all odds. The princess stepped forward, her posture changing. It was no longer the stance of a ruler set on dominance, but one of someone who had come to a realization that their worlds, their species, might be more alike than they had thought. She extended her hand toward Marcus, a symbol of the new alliance that was beginning to form. "Maybe I was wrong all along," she said, her voice steady but filled with something new. "Maybe it's time we stop seeing humans as a lower species and start seeing you as equals, as partners." Marcus looked at her hand for a moment before extending his own, shaking hers firmly. There was no mockery in this gesture, no condescension. It was a true partnership, forged through understanding and respect. And for the first time, Marcus felt that their differences didn't have to divide them. "I'd like that," Marcus replied. "Together, we could accomplish a lot." As their hands clasped, the room seemed to come alive with a new energy. The princess, once so sure of her superiority, now stood beside Marcus as an ally, not as a ruler over a lesser species. And as the court watched, the two of them began to lay the foundation for something greater than either of them could have imagined. An alliance built not on technology, but on mutual respect and understanding. The princess turned to her court, her voice ringing clear. "From this moment forward, we will not see humanity as a mere curiosity or a threat. We will see them as equals, as partners in a new future." The court fell silent, then erupted into murmurs of agreement. The change was happening, and it was only the beginning. Marcus smiled, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. He had come here to prove humanity's worth, but in the end, it was his willingness to show respect, to understand the princess, that had made the difference. Together, they were not so different after all. The news of the unexpected alliance between the princess and the humans spread quickly throughout the royal court. The tension that had once filled the room was replaced with a murmur of disbelief. The warriors who had been defeated in battle by Marcus stood in small groups, their expressions a mix of respect and confusion. They had never imagined they would lose to a human. And now, they were forced to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the humans they had always regarded as insignificant. In the grand hall, the princess addressed her court, her voice carrying authority, but tinged with uncertainty. "From now on, humans will not be seen as weak." Her eyes scanned the room, meeting the gazes of her advisors and generals. "We will work together. We will learn from each other." For a moment, there was a silence. Then one of her senior advisors, a tall and imposing alien with silver skin, stepped forward. His voice was loud and commanding. "Your Highness, with all due respect, you are making a grave mistake. How can we trust these humans? They are unpredictable, dangerous. We should not be lowering ourselves to their level." The princess's expression darkened as the room fell silent once again. She had expected resistance. It was natural for some to fear change, especially when it came to something as significant as the idea of an alliance with humans. "We have underestimated them," the princess said, her voice firm. "Their strength lies not in their size or their technology, but in their determination and creativity. Marcus showed me that today." She turned to Marcus, who stood beside her with a calm expression, a quiet acknowledgement in his eyes. The advisor shook his head, clearly displeased. "This is not a time for idealism. Our people have thrived for centuries through strength and superiority. Why should we risk everything for a race that can barely hold its own against our warriors?" A few others in the room nodded in agreement, their eyes filled with skepticism. The idea of collaborating with humans felt wrong to them, as if it went against everything their people had believed for generations. They were powerful, advanced, and they had never needed to rely on anyone else. To be bound to a species they had always seen as weak seemed like a dangerous gamble. The princess stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of the opposition. She knew they were right in some ways. They had always been the dominant species, and this alliance with the humans seemed foolish to many. But she could not ignore what she had witnessed. Marcus had not only outsmarted her warriors, but he had also made her see something she had never considered before. Strength didn't come from power alone. It came from perseverance, from the will to adapt, and from the courage to face the impossible. "I have made my decision," the princess said finally, her tone resolute. "We will form this alliance, and I will not allow fear or tradition to stop it. Humanity has more to offer than we realize." The advisor's face twisted with frustration, but he said nothing. The room was filled with murmurs, some supportive, others doubtful. It was clear that this was just the beginning. The princess had taken a stand, but the true challenge was yet to come. Could they truly work together? Could they overcome centuries of distrust and prejudice to build a future side by side? Marcus watched the scene unfold, understanding the gravity of the situation. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. There were still many who would resist the idea of an alliance, many who saw humans as nothing more than a curiosity. But he also knew that the princess had taken the first step towards something greater, a partnership built on respect and the willingness to learn from one another. The tension in the room was far from over, but for the first time, Marcus felt hopeful. Change was on the horizon, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The days following the princess's declaration were filled with both excitement and tension. The court was divided, with some embracing the idea of an alliance with humanity, while others resisted it with all their might. The princess knew the path ahead would not be easy. Change never was. But in her heart, she felt the certainty that this was the right decision. Humanity had something to offer her people, something her people needed. Marcus, standing beside her, could feel the weight of the challenge. He had earned the respect of the princess, but he knew that respect would take time to spread throughout her entire court. It wasn't just about fighting battles. It was about changing the way an entire species thought about another. That was never simple. "The court is divided," the princess said one evening as they walked through the palace gardens, the two of them alone for a rare moment of quiet. Her voice was tinged with concern. "I can't change their minds overnight. Some of them still see you as nothing more than a passing curiosity." Marcus looked at her, understanding the difficulty of the situation. It's always hard to change people's minds, especially when they've been taught one thing their entire lives. But the fact that you've taken this step, that you've stood by it, means more than you realize. It's the first step in changing the way things are. The princess nodded, grateful for his words, but still uncertain. She had never questioned the beliefs of her people before. She had always assumed that strength came from dominance, from superior technology, from control. Now she was learning that real strength came from understanding, from the willingness to learn, and from the courage to take a risk. In the days that followed, the princess held several meetings with her advisors, carefully explaining her decision. She spoke of the things she had learned from Marcus, the qualities of humanity that she had never seen before. Slowly, some of her advisors began to soften. They started to understand what she had seen in Marcus, in the human spirit. But there were still those who were unconvinced, who saw this alliance as nothing more than a foolish gamble. One of the most vocal opponents was the same advisor who had spoken out during the meeting in the throne room. He argued that aligning with a species so unpredictable could bring nothing but trouble. The princess listened, but she did not back down. She understood his concerns, but she also knew that avoiding change wasn't the answer. Her people had thrived for centuries, but the galaxy was evolving. And humanity, though small and seemingly insignificant, had the ability to adapt in ways that her people could not yet comprehend. A week later, a historic event took place. The princess, standing beside Marcus, addressed the entire court. This time, her tone was not uncertain or hesitant, but confident. Today marks the beginning of a new era, an era where we as a people will not be afraid to learn from others. We will not let fear hold us back from forging new alliances. Today, we stand together with humanity, not as rulers and subjects, but as equals. Her words resonated through the court. The room was still, but the tension that had once been there began to melt away. One by one, the skeptical advisors began to nod in agreement, their faces softened by the princess's conviction. Marcus stood beside her, not as an outsider, but as a partner. He had come to this foreign world expecting to fight, to prove humanity's worth. But now, he was standing at the forefront of something much more important, a future where humans and aliens could stand side by side, not as enemies, but as allies. The princess smiled at him, her eyes reflecting both pride and relief. "This is just the beginning," she said softly, as the court erupted into murmurs of agreement. For the first time, Marcus truly felt that they had accomplished something lasting. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with the princess by his side, he knew that humanity's place in this galaxy was no longer in question. Together, they would build a future of cooperation, understanding, and shared strength.